viewers of OBN Horn of Africa. Today I'm joining Kobina Jerry from UK, and we are going to discuss the current issue in Ethiopia and in other African countries as well. And welcome, Mr. Kobina, once again, and it is really my pleasure to host you again.
Yeah, good morning, Brother Oluma and OBN. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I think let me give you a chance to express yourself. Many African youths want to know who is Kobina.
Okay, well, brilliant. Well, yeah, my name's Kobina. I'm one of the coordinating secretaries of the Pan-African Youth Support Action Command of the Global Majority Versus campaign, otherwise known as GMVS PASAC. And we're a global African youth coordinating circle of the Global Majority Versus campaign, working to promote not only human rights, but the connections of our African family as to decisions we need to make forward, building as a generation of youth power in our communities.
It is good when you express yourself than I express you. That's why I'm giving you a chance. Let me start with this question, Mr. Kobina. Recently, the Ethiopian government has freed many opposition political leaders, including Jawar Mohammed, a prominent political opposition party member, and the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali, quoted that forgiveness is a sign of victory and maturity. This is what he has said in Amharic. And what is your reflection on this?
So we have to, of course, welcome this. It's important that in all of the conflict and of all of the counterinsurgency and infiltration that we should expect to be seeing in the next few years, and the heightened tensions around Africa and our lands, that actually we're seeing an ability to show what democratic processes are. And not only that, but to show that in the true image of our Africanness, that there are other ways that we can settle our differences through discourse, through coming together, through settling our differences at a table in discussions, then resulting to either oppression or worse, violence and military warfare. We have to kind of focus and stay on track if we are to, bring the African unity that's necessary at this moment. So it's a welcome statement. Of course, challenges are going to continue, and we don't expect these things to be easy, but it's something that we have to welcome, because elsewhere on the continent, we don't see that same picture.
Recently, as you know, the leaders of Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, agreed to impose sanctions on Mali in connection with the military rules failure to swiftly, reinstate civilian rule. And what can you say about this again?
No, thank you for drawing the connection. Let's call this out exactly for what it is. The first question you asked was about Jawar Mohammed and the ability to peacefully deal with our political opposition. Now, if we go to the other side of the continent, we have a completely different picture. We have a government in Ghana that was elected under dubious circumstances through countless situations of electoral violence. There was, on the day of the elections, there was no less than at least 8 electoral killings and a repression of voters. And this is the ECOWAS that is defending democracy, so-called, on the African continent with the support of Western intervention. So let's take ourselves back to the Mali, Guinea, Ghana collaboration that at one point in Africa's history brought Pan-African hope to the continent. That was the West African economic area that had been promised to Africans and the generations then. But ECOWAS now, who is, with all the support of IMF restructuring in the countries, is now daring to shut down the potential of collaboration through violent sanctions on the people, backed internationally. And so this is a real issue. And it takes us back many decades to a point of certain insurgents on the continent. And while, a military transition is not the ideal government, while military power isn't the ideal government for the true democracy that our people need, deserve, and are fighting for, we should be very clear that the greater threat to the democracy of the people than that is the forced shutting down of land borders, borders that weren't drawn by Africans in the first place, land borders that have been reimposed on the continent in the 21st century, economically now speaking, and that is happening from countries whose track record on human rights, as well as democracy and political transparency, are particularly poor. So from here, it's very clear that we should call out ECOWAS's position, and that the role that countries like in East Africa can be playing right now is actually to connect us in to making clear position on support for to end this sort of terrorism. And this is super important right now for a country, Mali, that is actually suffering and going to need that sort of those grassroots connections to be made. And that also needs to be understood by many of people in our Fix the Country movement, who are looking for ways to fix the country and need to realize that one of the solutions is going to be to reach out to their neighbors in Mali and to communities outside of the ECOWAS.
Well, and how do you think Africa strengthen its economic development to free itself from Western dependence? Because many African countries are waiting for aid from Western and global countries.
Yeah, I mean, it's spot on. It's quite clear, and it's a challenge I put to OBN and actually projects that perhaps we can on air. I'd say this is the sort of thing we should be thinking to develop and work on. These conversations need to now extend beyond our interviews into also the sort of convenings of young people from throughout the continent who actually are now being forced to engage with the importance of these questions. There is enough energy throughout the continent that together we can actually start to really generate that consciousness from the grassroots level. And that dependence, that self-dependence that we need, which is our right recognized in the international law, which is our right recognized in the African Constitution of Human and People's Rights, needs to be brought through grassroots conscientization and raising the legal awareness of our peoples. This is very important work. This work is very necessary right now, and it's the sort of work that can easily be rolled out. But these conversations need to be built into now far more concrete. We need to try to see what work we can develop to build concrete networks of communications and relationships. The only way we can build that self-dependence is through firstly knowing each other and learning from each other direct.
That's why we are inviting people like you from different parts of the continent, and just their voice be heard among African people. And Ethiopia is among countries making significant economic gains, every year from remittance, and 1 million diaspora are also coming from different parts of the world following Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's call. And my question is, what role should the diaspora play in maximizing this contribution?
So one of the projects we've proposed here in the UK is what we're calling the development of a Ma'at Ubuntu Jama. It's a word that has been coined and brought together, looking at our traditions of justice, of coming together, and Ujama, one of our ancient principles of the type of polity or unit that we can develop. The point is this: what we need from the diaspora is the creation of autonomous African communities who can defend Africa's interests and therefore be the people that stand up and say, this Africa on the continent that stands behind me is the force that is empowering me to be here, should we choose to be in the diaspora. So we have to really work in the diaspora to actually be supported in the development of our autonomous power, and therefore allow that power to bear upon support both and dialogue from the continent and vice versa. And that's the sort of work we need to be doing to exercise, influence and intervention in other parts of the world. so that, you know, we can keep Africa's coherence and be able to advocate for it. And this can be built linking back to, you know, institutions that are being built on the continent. So it's really that we have to step up, not just in terms of remittances, but also I think in terms of political advocacy, presence, visibility, pride, and confidence to do so, because there is a continent really here that is fighting for us.
And Kobina, there is also claims that many Western countries, investors, come to Africa by the name of investment, and but loot many natural resources from the continent. And why Africans, you know, usually fail to utilize their own resources, natural resources by their own.
Nkrumah once has a very powerful description of neocolonialism as the exchange of the culture of the external power in exchange for our natural resources. So often we find ourselves looking for that which is not ours, and we're getting shortchanged for the lands and our resources, our materials that are being looted from us. Now, you take Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, which is one of the most mineral resource rich countries in the world, with enough minerals to feed Africa lifetimes over, food, and also potentially energy. This is what the rest of the world knows. That knowledge is fully available to them and their investors, and they're more than aware that the lifestyles that they've developed outside of the continent are the lifestyles that can only be brought and continued at the expense of we as Africans. And so we actually have to wake up to another reality to this, which is that we can't afford to go down the trappings of that type of lifestyle. We have to develop actually an alternate progression form, which means that we aren't reliant on the exploitation of our own lands to our own detriment, because of course we're facing other serious issues around the looting and destruction of our lands. And so it's quite a complicated picture, because we're failing to use the resources because we don't know their value, but also we've been mistaught, we've also been miseducated about that value, which isn't that we should seek also to just take out those resources and develop them and seek projects which are going to take us down a dirty path, but we need to be thinking, actually, how are we going to navigate the next 50 to 100 years with changing climate, with changing geographies, and with changing demographics? It's a question of education, it's a question of upskilling and tools, but quite quickly we can build those institutions and networks to facilitate that. And
many Africans hope that effective implementation of the African continental free trade area will be the continent to become, help the continent to become economically self-dependent, you know. Then do you share this idea, and what is your feel to effectively implement this initiative?
It returns to this emphasis on really on the grassroots. The first part of your question, free trade carries with it its own politics, and so we should be. There's a very serious importance here that we don't just fall ourselves down the illusion that free trade itself is going to be enough to guarantee us the self-dependence. If free trade is the mechanism by design which drives down prices in order to maximize and make more efficient the supply chain, that could also be a situation that drives us not only into unhealthy competition, but also pulls resources in directions that don't actually equitably share the riches, wealth, dignity, and quality of life that Africans deserve. And so the aspect of free trade throughout the continent, which is necessary, you know, the destruction of the eventual erasure of these Bantustan creations of colonialism, the return to the trading patterns that we've had for a long time, needs to carry with it, you know, a real vision of Ubuntu. I mean, there are so many different words that I think you mentioned one the last time we were speaking, that carry the importance of what type of trade relationships we're going to build. And for us to do that, we really have to also manage this, at the level of real collaboration. And so it doesn't promise us anything. The only promise that can come with that free trade is an economic vision of equity and sharing and harmony. And so we should be very aware of those dangers. At the same time, that free trade, if it drives down those prices, gives a lot of space to the richest buyer and those of us who are prepared to be corrupted in the weaknesses of our characters, because we do have those weaknesses, will open ourselves up, no doubt, to the intervention of foreign investment. So these are the things that we have to be very cautious about to defend when we talk about free trade area. But it is important that we build real connections between communities and their industries around the continent.
And what should be the position of African intellectuals and youth like you, Pan-Africanists, and others in defending the continent from external economic pressures like imposed on Mali and even in Ethiopia?
Yes, we have to organize. We have to very seriously organize and know each other. One of the actions we've taken is to call out the UK government for the violations of its human rights globally, because we know that economic sanctions imposed by this country on our lands, for instance, violate my rights right here. What we don't have are the institutions that we've built yet to defend that call for the defense of our rights. But it's very important actually that we establish actually a network and the equivalent actually of a youth Pan-African parliament, the sort of body that can actually speak and advocate for the necessary policies that we're trying to develop, who can put on the table and outdoor the key plans that we can very openly discuss the vision and the critique and the necessary changes that we need for the continent and for ourselves to take power in the future and be leaders. So we have to be very clear that our roles are primarily about denouncing and calling out the failures and the violations of the global order, calling out imperialism, and making sure that education is readily accessible to as many people as possible. Developing better relationships where possible. And hopefully we can do this in roundtables and in the sort of formats that allow us to see the true diversity of our opinions, but also challenge us to think about, what next? How much further can we go? Because we're definitely all feeling that there's a lot more that can be done, and that advice people's suggestions we're always open to, and the contact. I hope that our contacts can be added below for any thoughts that people have or dialogue that people want to begin, or future projects that we should most certainly be working on. But it's definitely, we need to know each other, and we need to be very public and be very, very happy to make sure that our opinions are heard, so that we can be honestly critiquing that we have only the best for Africans. The
Ethiopian government has a plan to economically integrate the Horn of Africa and expand the trade to continental level. And to succeed this, it is already, started joining some neighboring countries through roads and railways. We can take the relation between Ethiopia and Kenya, Moyale, Mombasa roads and so on. And there is also Ethio-Djibouti Railway. And there are many, many interconnections in this Horn of Africa in terms of boosting common trade. And what challenges do you expect is, in realizing this plan?
So again, all of these plans have to be welcomed and celebrated. We have to also see them that they present a threat to the global order. These are huge, bold plans. They are very important plans. They return, they show and demonstrate something that has been denied and lied to for Africans for such a long time, that were incapable of this type of cooperation, that were incapable of the careful planning and development of our people's needs. And so the threat that is coming, the threat that's already being designed, is most certainly the counterinsurgency and infiltration of Western forces. We've already seen that both in the diplomatic sphere, but because of the importance of those channels of the Horn of Africa and to Western interests in the Middle East and northern, looking at the northern parts of the water streams right up towards Egypt, that there is going to be the serious threat of violence and intervention. So we have to protect and defend those interests most definitely, but also need to think about how do we make it defensible. So while all of those threats are kind of necessary and we can see that they're going to come from all sides, we should be thinking about how the Horn of Africa becomes a beacon for, like we talked about earlier with Mali. What else can be, how can this, be made understood to ordinary young peoples in Central Africa who might also see the need now for the importance of the Horn of Africa's consolidation. So we should expect a lot of scare tactics and a lot of threats. But we are celebrating this in the diaspora, and we think that what East Africa represents is an exciting chance to inspire South Africa as well. And hopefully it should wake up ECOWAS and the failings of quite some corrupt regimes to the true way to build an economic region of transparency and collaboration and the sharing of resources.
And I think media has a greater role in defending the continent in general, and mobilizing youth like you and the entire people of the continent in defending and fighting against neocolonialism. And if you can say something about this again.
Yes, there is always a statement that goes, the importance of recognizing what time we're in. And we are quite literally in a time when even the ordinary classes and ruling classes of the global north in Europe are waking up to the realization of the violence of neocolonialism. That means ordinary Europeans are really actually starting to understand the importance of decolonization. I mean, forcibly it's being borne to bear upon them by the realities of the climate crisis, which has seen how neocolonialism has driven us pretty much to the point of serious risks, disaster of the lands, climate crisis, and what the worldwide ecological escalating climate crises, multiple of them, the genocides and ecocides. And so the real global order and the ruling powers are in particular trying to work out how they're going to hold on to the power that they built up so long. And so there's a specific opportunity that we're in right now, when actually if we move with vision and boldness, that many people see the extent of the rights, of the violations of our rights, and many people are actually interested in seeing the development and the fruition of the African people's sovereignty. So neocolonialism could be, if we seize the opportunity, seeing the real last, seeing their empires on its last back legs. But that depends entirely on us. It depends entirely on how strongly we move forward, but also that we define very clearly what neocolonialism is, which is how it's present in everything from not just the languages that we speak, to the money that we trade in, to the institutions that we send our children to the type of education that we prioritize, and also to the role of our ability to preserve and hold on to our indigeneities and identities as African peoples. All of these things represent the resurgence and the rebirth and the reconsolidation of the multipolarity of African identities. And all of those pieces represent also our sacred right and path for reparations. And so the end of neocolonialism for us ends with the self-repair of our communities and reparatory justice, which means fundamentally that there can be no repair without ending the harm. And that harm is the exploitation and that foreign intervention. And that's the neo-colony situation, which is, still the reality for the vast majority of the continent. Still, the Francophone African countries are tied to the French Central African Bank. Still, the IMF has its hands and its role and its security ties in ECOWAS. Still, Libya is under high surveillance and military intervention and being policed by the EU. Still, we have, puppets and idiots in power who are, saying one thing, but selling lands and selling resources for next to nothing without developing the potential of our people. Neocolonialism is still real and still very present, and it's affecting our people dearly. But it is being shaken, and it can't actually continue much longer. And that reality needs to bear upon us as soon as it has already started to take a hold of the peoples of Europe and the US, because the panic that they are going to mobilize towards is going to be one of real sheer terror and fighting and violence, and that is currently what they're preparing for. Just to add this, a report was leaked last year by the UK military, and it said that in the event of a 4-degree world, 4 degrees of global warming, which could be reached by the end of this century, that they were preparing militaries and the army would be prepared to secure resources for people's survival and engagement. So, and that was, a public document that said very clearly that they're preparing to go out and steal and loot resources. So if we don't seize the opportunity now, where we might go could be a century or so back in time. So this is what we see as what neocolonialism is right now, and the pivotal chance we have for change and emancipation.
Some media experts and intellectuals have also been suggesting that Africa should have common media platform that speaks on the behalf of the continent. If you take, for example, CGTN and CNN and BBC, they do have their own objectives. And why not for Africa? People like Kwame Gonza from Kwame Nkrumah Ideological Institute are suggesting such kind of initiatives and ideas. If you can say something on this, and this is my final question, Mr. Kobina.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is a fantastic, this is an important idea. Why don't we have those institutions? And why are they being denied to us when we try to build them? This is one of the key battle holds and pieces left of the puzzle, that we don't still have these public institutions that the diaspora really can be the driving force around creating, that can defend our interests and make it quite clear. But the groundwork that needs to be done to make those institutions firm and solid again comes down to this really early point, which is in such an important collaboration that are our next steps. Concretely, next what we have to do is convene the networks of forces that could pull the resources towards that type of institutions' foundations being solid and firm. Making sure that when that information goes out, it reaches not just, the media class, or it's not just talk among intellectuals, because that has been a big issue of ours, talk among intellectuals. It reaches the grassroots communities. How are we getting this information to our villages? How are we getting it into popular education? How are we using the infrastructure that we do have to make sure that it reaches the right places? And that's the type of institution that something like the BBC has represented for so long for the British people. Here in the UK, the BBC has no less than 4 radio stations, a news channel, and is the state provider for over 4 channels. At the same time, they pay for a service that still has, I think, over 600 million Africans tuning in to the BBC World Service. That's what the BBC is. These are serious forces and institutions that have built impressive infrastructure to support them. And the vision that we need to have has to be one that tries to see just how much we can expand that reach and where we're missing. And the work that we all are accelerating, and that clearly is our priority, is how is it that those connections are made throughout the reaches of our grassroots, in our villages, in our communities.
Finally, if you have any message for my audience, you are welcome. And otherwise, that's all about our discussion, Mr. Kobina. I'm sure you want to say something.
As always, I greet my Ethiopian family, but also to the work of the Horn of Africa. I really extend this challenge to people for us to be thinking about, and actually to make that contact, to establish the next step, something that is so important for us, that reaches the Horn of Africa, is not only the work that we're trying to realize here and what relationship we can build between the type of institutions that connect ordinary peoples in Ethiopia to ordinary peoples in the convening that were the events that we're holding here in the UK, but also to see if they can support the education of communities in West Africa, in other places, in that we can convene groups of young people, engage in our communities to learn from each other, and that we record and that, we put that conversation out and we demonstrate a vision of a young generation who represent the majority of Africa rising up and taking our shape. So that's the challenge to all those listeners, and hopefully a collaboration for OBN and us and all the wonderful participants and brothers and sisters you have on it.
A young Pan-Africanist, Kobina Jerry from United Kingdom. Thank you so much for your insights, and we appreciate.
Love and guidance, all appreciations to you also. Thank you, Brother Aluma.
This is all about our discussion with Kobina Jerry from United Kingdom. Till next edition, goodbye.